Thank you. That may make it sound like I just can't make up my mind what I want to do each day, which may in fact be true. It's wonderful to see you all here. First, I have a question. Are the power sockets working yet? They are? Okay, good. Because somebody was saying earlier on Twitter they weren't actually switched on. So I thought I'd just check so that it could be fixed. I took this photograph in the cathedral city of Norwich in the UK. It's a prehistoric, a fossilized keyboard representing the fact that these technologies have been around a very long time. I believe it was probably used by velociraptors because the keys are quite small, so you'd need claws to be able to operate it. You can see it. It's in Princes Street in Norwich. Feel free to go and have a look next time you're passing. Now, we've heard from Jill and Max and Mark about what's happening with Europeana, and I'm very pleased to be involved in what is at the moment a small way, I hope it will be a larger way, in the ongoing project, because it is so vitally important that we open up access to our cultural and our scientific heritage. And what I want to do in this brief talk is to put that work in a broader context and to explore the ways in which we can effectively pull the analog past into the digital future. And I want to talk about something that I'd quite like us all to build, because I think it will provide a good framework for this sort of thinking and this sort of work. It's a project that I've been working on at the BBC called the Digital Public Space. And the Digital Public Space is an overarching framework for how we start to think about the whole wealth of digital data that is available to us, about how we pull everything together. It is, to some extent, the outcome of my last 20 years of work in the arts and cultural sector as a technologist. I confess that I'm a recovering programmer. Like being an alcoholic, you never quite get away from it, but you can go months at a time without hacking anyone else's PHP. And I've managed to stay away from those WordPress themes for a good month now, so I'm well on the way to recovery. If we get this right, if we do the work we're all involved with in an integrated way, then I think we can build something that will have as much impact on the world as the ARPANET did. This is an ARPANET control room. As the web did. This is Tim Berners-Lee's first web server. And it will be a project that can build openness and freedom of expression into the very heart of culture and society, and perhaps see off some of the forces of darkness that so often threaten to overwhelm us. It might even, if we're very fortunate, give the Enlightenment another 500 years, allow us to build more buildings like this one, to bring in the collected cultural heritage and to ensure that everyone is aware of the past, so that as they build the future, they know what some of the answers to the questions are, they know what has been thought before. But if we're going to do that, we need to think carefully about what that project is and the technological foundations that we need to build it on. And Europeana, and particularly Europeana Connect, are about how we deal with digitized cultural assets and with scientific data. They're how we deal with the things we've made, the things we care about, the things that survived, the things that we think the future ought to know, the things that we know or believe ought to be true, the things that we want to tell other people. And for some people, indexing Europe's cultural heritage, providing pointers to things that exist in a digital form, whether it's scans, whether it's 3D meshes, whether it's digitized documents, whether it's digitally native stuff, may not seem as important as keeping accounting records up to date or digitizing the intellectual property that corporations hold to run their businesses. But I think it is, and of course you think so too, because that's why you're here today. I think that if you've come here today, that demonstrates you're willing to sign up for the larger project, which is to go beyond just digitizing and find ways to take that digital information and use it to make the world a better place. Now, before I go on to discuss what I think that will mean, what that entails, I want to make a very important point. Some people talk about a digital world or a digital age. But of course, we do not live in a digital world, and we never will. We are not heading towards a digital future, whatever that may be. The physical world is not going to vanish. We are not going to be sublimed into the machines like characters in the Disney film Tron to be put under control of the master control program. We are not going to lose what it is to be meat, flesh in the world. We will remain embodied minds. There'll be no singularity. I personally don't think there'll ever be any interfacing with consciousness. The machine future doesn't lie before us. Instead, we will have an analog world and a digital world that coexist, a hybrid space between things. And more of us will spend more and more of our time in that space. The physical experience, analog culture, digital technologies will all come together. And if this is anything, it is an age of electronics, not an age of bits. And those of us lucky enough to have easy access to computers and smartphones and connectivity are on the verge of developing a digital culture, just as the early scholars, with access to printers and codices and postal systems, created a print culture. And that transition to a digital culture is vitally important. The Europeana project marks one very significant step in that transition. It is one step. And it is a transition that I think is as significant as the invention of writing and literacy 5,000 years ago. It matters more than movable type, however important movable type was. It is, as my friend Glyn Moody puts it, a once-in-a-civilization transition. And it has consequences for every part of our lives, from how we raise our children, to how we do our jobs, to which jobs are done, and to how we remember our ancestors. It is going to change many things. It's going to change the assumptions about how we live our lives. And all of us here are on the crest of that transition. We already, to some extent, have our heads inside the screens. We can see the digital information. We allow it to transform our lives. Everyone else is following suit. So things shift as a result of that. Just as Google Ngrams has transformed the world of literary scholarship, here I looked for the occurrence of the phrase digital Europe in books over the last 200 years. Not surprisingly, it didn't occur very often before 1980. Yes. But then it sort of seems to have peaked and dropped off again, but now it's rising. However, this is just Google's database, so clearly imperfect. But what Ngrams is doing for literary scholarship, what Wolfram Alpha and Mathematica have done for mathematics research, so somebody is going to do to the nature of science. We already see that science based around big data and big databases is transforming the way theories are formulated, hypotheses are tested, the way data is evaluated. Meteorology has already been transformed by this, as has genetics. All other areas will be subject to the same transformations. The digital technologies are shaping the world in which we all live and work, and they're also shaping the possibilities that we will decide to embrace. But it goes deeper than that, because they're also going to change the way you think, and they're going to do that quite literally. So the term paradigm shift is a vastly overused term, created by Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s. It's probably the second most abused term in science after quantum leap, and it's up there with the word synergy. There's a word I've sworn never to use in public except in sneer quotes. But although Kuhn believed that the term paradigm shift could only be applied to the hard sciences, so the information about the fast neutrinos that's coming out of CERN will be a classic case where if that data proves to be reliable, it isn't. If we do find that something strange is going on there, it might be, then we will have to rethink hard scientific principles. Thomas Kuhn, the scientific philosopher, thought you could only use the term paradigm shift about hard sciences because in the arts and humanities there was no basic set of beliefs that you could argue with. That it was always impossible to distinguish between the Marxist model or the structuralist model there was no hard basis for argument or disagreement or even agreement. You couldn't shift the paradigm because there was no fundamental basic set of beliefs. I think actually we can call what is happening now in the way we're all working a paradigm shift. That the shift to digital is so fundamental that it alters the basis on which all of our theories and models of society and culture are built, and as a result it qualifies. No area, therefore, will be untouched as the age of electronics consolidates its hold. And we have two possibilities here. They're the possibilities that were outlined by the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget when discussing child development. We can assimilate the new world. We can try to incorporate the new things into our existing structures of thought and our frameworks of knowledge, or we can change ourselves and accommodate those changes by altering the ways we think, the ways we operate, the core assumptions of society. And my belief, quite clearly, is that the second is now the only option. That we have to change the way we think about the world, and that what we're doing at the moment is part of that process. Fortunately, we've done this before. The invention of reading is the best possible example, because learning how to read is an accommodation that goes as deep as it can be. It's an accommodation that requires us all to rewire our brains in order to take advantage of the new technology. In her fantastic, thoroughly recommended 2008 book, Proust and the Squid, the psychologist Marianne Wolf uses neuropsychology and imaging studies to demonstrate that the reading brain is differently wired from the illiterate pre-reading brain. That different types of writing bring about different sorts of neural organization in order to permit fluent reading. That the process of teaching a child to read is to perform brain surgery without a scalpel. Now, this is really important and really interesting. For one thing, it tells us that in the difference between literate and pre-literate cultures, there are actually real differences in brain organization. Now, as far as I know, no culture has ever lost literacy. So pre-literate is a better term than non-literate. Acquiring writing seems to be a one-off thing. The culture acquires writing and it sticks. And writing, the ability to interpret symbols marked on rock or paper or whatever, is so important in the development of culture. It allows engagement with the world through symbols and symbolic manipulation. The written word comes to sit between a perceived reality and its representation in the mind as a layer of abstraction that can be externalized, that can be preserved, that can be passed on. And this is very similar, of course, to what we're doing with screen-based systems today. We are building a new layer of abstraction. Interestingly enough, ideas in an oral culture only exist when they're being spoken or when they're held clearly in someone's mind. If you think about an oral, pre-literate culture, once the last person forgets a particular word, that word might not have existed. Might as well not have existed. That word vanishes. If nobody can remember it and nobody speaks it again and it was never written down, did that word ever exist? It's similar to the game, which some of you may know about. Those of you who do know about it just lost. Those of you who don't might want to look it up on Wikipedia, and then you will lose it. But in the same way, writing allows us to preserve and create cultures. And we are currently living through the emergence of a digital culture where the affordances of binary storage of all forms of information, almost infinite storage of captured data, fast, reliable networks that move this data around, and devices that let more and more of us use this information, allow more of us to live in the space between real and virtual. And we have created in that a new form of society, one that is organized around the network and its capabilities. Now, those who stay offline, those who have an email address that they never use or dismiss Facebook and Twitter, will still live in a society shaped by its engagement with this online world. And those who've been immersed in digital tools and capabilities are increasingly going to come to define what is normal, how systems operate, processes of government and governance, administration, everything. Those who choose to be offline will be as disadvantaged and excluded as those who are illiterate in a literate culture. And in particular, those who don't learn how to engage with structured data will find themselves outside the mainstream. So this is a new world that we are creating, one based on the affordances of digital technology that will require all of us to change the way we think. So what are we going to do with it? What are we actually going to do with the power that we have in this new world? Well, I think there are three things. The first is to build openness right at the heart of it. The second is to make connections between all aspects of it. And then the third is to build on the firm foundations that that provides to create a digital public space in which we can all engage, to create a free and open society using the capabilities of these technologies. So first comes openness. We live in an age of electronics where many of the aspects of our daily lives are shaped for good or ill by what happens in processors like this Arduino, where the flow and detection of tiny electric currents and the opening and closing of silicon-based switches determines actions, capabilities, things we can and can't do. And the things these technologies do are, we all must admit, truly astonishing. Their application has transformed the lives of all of us. But technology does not exist in a vacuum. And the growing use of these powerful digital computers, connected by ever faster and more pervasive networks, requires us to ask very hard questions, and we need to ask them quickly. How are they being used to shape society? How can we balance the commercial imperative that drives their development with the need to ensure fairness and equity and justice? When I was a child, computers were like this. They were big and lumbering expensive. This is an IBM System 360, the computer in use at the Cambridge University Computer Lab, where I did my degree. Once a university or a company bought an IBM mainframe, it was game over. They were locked in. That was the way the world went. You bought the mainframe, only software built by IBM would run on that mainframe. You were an IBM house or a DEC house or a Burroughs house, whatever. In the 80s and the 90s, things changed. The processors got faster, the disk got bigger, the network reached its tendrils into millions of processors, and like an oppressed people throwing off their monument-building dictators, openness began to triumph. Open standards and open systems defined the era. And even the owned and proprietary and locked-in technologies like IBM's AS400 or Microsoft Windows began to talk open languages, to offer open interfaces. Now, I fear, we have lost the willingness to fight for these open systems, and we're being lured back into the cave of vendor lock-in. And we can point to many examples of this. The iPad is just one of them. Jonathan Zittrain, in his book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, enumerates them in rather painful detail, talking about how we've given up the generative potential of the open PC architecture for platforms that offer a safe, controlled environment, free of malware, free of viruses, free of blue screens of death, but also free of choice and openness and flexibility. Apple has extended its zone of influence. If you now read the App Store guidelines, you'll find that there's a moral clause in there. Apps containing pornographic material will be rejected. And there are anti-competitive restrictions. Apps with metadata that mentions the name of any other computer platform will be rejected. These limit the imagination and the capabilities of future technologies in a way that will act as a model for other companies. Facebook controls the way we represent ourselves. Amazon removes copies of an unlicensed version of 1984 from people's Kindles remotely. Google removes malicious apps from Android phones. The US government took over a botnet and disabled the software on infected computers without asking users for permission. All these things are happening. And then there's Google Plus and the NIM wars. I'm Bill Thompson on Google. I have an easy, nice Western name. I can get away with it. I'm not going to have my account taken away by Google because they think I should identify myself in a way that they find acceptable. In case after case, the providers of hardware and software and services are asserting their ability to control what we do. And if this is a world in which these network-connected devices mediate our lives, then we have to accept that every one of these media is being massaged by its owners in a very Marshall McLuhan-type way. 50 years ago, real power lay with those who controlled printing presses. It then moved to those who ran the transmission networks for television. Now, every company with a stake in the electronic communications network is asserting whatever degree of control it can get, and we are letting them, and we need to stop that happening. As Richard Stallman, the founder of the free software movement, said last month, if there's a choice of proprietary products to do a job, that means you have a choice of masters. We have to speak out against locked down systems and support open platforms. But fortunately, we have a revolutionary vanguard in our midst. It's all of you. To George Orwell in 1984, hope lay with the proles. But really hope lies with the coders, with the programmers, the people who, with keyboards in their hands, will wield the only weapon that matters, running code. And I think if we want an open society based around principles of equality of opportunity and social justice and free expression, we have to build it on technologies that are themselves open, that this is the only way to encourage a diverse online culture that allows all voices to be heard, and the choice of openness lies fundamentally with the programmers. That to embrace a digital culture and look to a post-digital one where the boundary between online and offline is not just transcended but forgotten, we need open systems, open standards, open technologies. We need an internet built around the end-to-end principle where any connected computer can exchange data with any other connected computer. We need computers that will run any program written for them instead of having those programs vetted and approved by gateway companies. It means free software that can be used and changed and redistributed by anyone without asking for permission. And of course, fundamentally, it means open data. And it means open data in a usable form. Not a PDF, not locked away, but properly formulated RDF or something similar so it can be made available and be interpreted by anyone or any program that wants it. We have to be able to do that because otherwise we just have disconnected islands. Otherwise we don't have real sharing and openness of data. And that connectedness that open data makes possible is the second of my principle. If there's one transformative technology that will significantly enhance the value of the online sphere for everyone, then it's open linked data. And while it's far from perfect, it offers the best hope for all. Building the open linked data world is a collective endeavor of amazing complexity, but it has such enormous transformative potential. It could raise the ocean, raise the level of the digital ocean on which we're all floating, instead of having these islands of connected data. Open data makes things visible, linked data makes things possible, and for European, of course, that makes perfect sense. If you're going to have access to any work of art, any piece of music or recorded performance, if they are going to be present and available in a digital culture, then they must be catalogued appropriately. And that cataloging means RDF. They must be made available using tools like OWL. They must be expressed using the typology of the semantic web so that anyone who wants them can reach down, take them, work with them, build on them, and integrate them into the broader cultural space. That's the aspiration, and it's a fine aspiration. But of course, Facebook could just as easily use all of these technologies to build another walled city like Kowloon. We need to build on what we've achieved so far to ensure there is an alternative space, that there's a space in which the world's cultural and heritage media, all the assets and all the data can be found, connected together, indexed, tagged, searchable, made open and visible and accessible to everyone to work with, to make it usable by individuals and institutions and machines, to ensure that we can access, appreciate, work with, modify, tag, do all that we want to. We need to build a digital public space that builds on existing and emerging web technologies to provide an open standards-based data model, a database management system, media asset management systems that are accessible to everyone who wants them, who has a reason to work with them. We need to build something that will encourage genuine engagement, something that will be to the future as the great collections of the Prado, the Louvre, the Rijksmuseum, the British Museum, and all those others were to the past and are to the present. And we have to start doing this now. Because there are two really good reasons to digitize the past and make it accessible in this way, to endorse open linked data as a way of doing it. First, we are the first generation that is capable of doing this. We have the tools in our hands. We have the data storage capabilities. We have the network. We have the processors. It is well within our power to digitize everything, but more than that, to make it available, to make it findable, to make it taggable. So we could do it. More fundamentally, I fear we may be the only generation that wants to do it. That those like me who grew up in a paper-based world of libraries like the fantastic one next door we'll be visiting later, appreciate the importance of the analog past and want to bring it into the digital future. But I fear that my children, well, no, my kids are okay, they're 18 and 20, that your children, you're all younger than me, will not value it in the same way and may choose not to do it. They will have grown up in a world of Google and Facebook and screens, and anything that is not visible on a screen will be invisible to them. The British Library in the UK has a strategy for 2020 which is about digitising its assets so they can be made available on screens, not throwing the books away, no, but ensuring that people get access to them, because very quickly we will forget the importance of the non-digital when it comes to cultural assets and history. So we're the first lot that can do this. We may be the only ones who want to, so we better get on with it and move it fast. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it properly. Open linked data is the way to build a foundation that will allow us to construct a wonderful digital Piazza San Marco once our data structures break ground. Thank you.